Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this third and final budget forum for the 18-19 year. Dave Malloy sends his regrets. He was going to present with us today, but he's in day-long meetings on a major research project and is doing good work on behalf of the university in that meeting. So we'll get going. This is the typical rider. We are videotaping this so that people in Saskatoon and elsewhere can watch it, and it will be archived on the budget update page like all of the other video presentations. So at the end of the presentation, if you want to ask a question, please come down to there's the other microphone there, one of the two microphones, and just state your name and whatever unit you're affiliated with so that people who are watching later or who are watching in Saskatoon know who you are and know what unit you're associated with. That looks like a long table of contents today, but we will try to move through it fairly quickly. So we're going to look quickly at provincial operating support and revenue. We want to talk briefly about how important the CCE contributions are in partnership with the faculties. A couple of examples of efficiencies and savings that I think some of you know about and others will be, I think, surprised to see. We'll talk then about the highlights of the 18-19 operating budget. We'll do some things that you've seen before, but we want now to put into greater context. We'll take you through a tuition overview so that you understand what we are charging students to attend this institution as their tuition and free revenue increases in importance in simply balancing our operating budget. We'll talk about scholarships briefly, and then we'll get into the meat of the presentation, which is how we worked with the requests from the Council Committee on Budget and the then recommendations from the Council Committee on Budget for academic and research and administrative requests. We'll conclude with a summation of the decisions, and then we're going to spend a bit of time. Dave will take you through just a clip from the budget letter, the detailed budget letter, which is already up online, just to help you understand how to read the figures on that letter. So we'll get underway. Dave.
Good. First of all, a little bit of a talk. We always try and situate where we were last year and then what are the changes. We always find that that's the easiest way to take and understand what are the new investments, what are the new revenue, what's the new revenue coming in, and then where is that new revenue leaving. Fortunately, this year there's a lot more black than the red that we had last year in terms of big decreases and things, and so we've got mostly good news items here. So the first one, of course, we didn't bother putting a line up there to show that we got zero for the government grant. I think everyone knows that, but we did get $886,000 as part of our good work, your good work, in terms of increasing enrollment, some research activity, a variety of different things, and just in terms of running it. But it's mainly the growth that we've had here at the University of Regina that has been more than the growth at the University of Saskatchewan. So that funding model shift has shifted money that much from U of S because it's one pot of money and the funding formula just divides it up. So we're getting 886 more, they're getting 886,000 less. In the budget, there was also an announcement, same news that we got last year, that there was a reduction. There has been a flow-through of $400,000 to the university directed to the Mackenzie Art Gallery. Last year it dropped down to $300,000, this year it dropped down to $200,000, so a decrease of $100,000. That doesn't change our bottom line because it's flow-through only, but it obviously is quite significant to our partners, the Mackenzie. And a small decrease in SIOS program funding. Later on we'll talk a little bit more overall about scholarships and things, so a negative here, but has been backfilled in other ways. And so that results in a net increase in what you'll see in the line in the budget plan with respect to government money. So it's actually up, even though we got 0%. But more importantly, there's other places where we've actually taken and driven to get more revenue. And so the first one is just from last year to this year. Last year we projected that we'd get 1% increase in enrollment. We did much better than that. I think it was 2.9% overall. So you take that 2.9% plus last year's tuition increase plus this year's tuition increase, you end up starting out with, we start out with an additional $2.4 million there. With the tuition fee increase, 2.8%, virtually across the board, takes and results in an additional $1.9 million of additional revenue for us. And the last one is, once again, we're predicting, this is Always risky to take and predict what's going to happen, but it's also, I think you could look at it as being somewhat conservative because we've managed to get more than 1% each year, but we're predicting an enrollment growth of an additional 1% going into next year. So that takes and generates another $0.6 million. So those are two different examples of additional revenue from our traditional sources of government and tuition. Now, other contributions and revenue savings also help significantly in the bottom line, and quite significantly. So the first one, if we look at what you folks are doing in the faculties, coordinated through CCE, and so I don't want to sort of say this is necessarily what the work that CCE is doing, but thankfully they are doing it and coordinating all of us, all of you, to take and do it. So the faculty is doing more teaching through that as the revenue generating unit. They're now up to, I think it's $29 million is the total operating budget for CCE, and the net profit out of that, which is remarkable, of $12.6 million. That net profit is up. Of course, we banked some of it. That profit goes straight to the bottom line to then be distributed and help the academic enterprise. This year, we're increasing or anticipating and increasing those projected revenues by $1.7 million. So, as you can see, compared to some of the other things, tuition fee increases and others, we're getting a huge lift internally from the work that we're doing just by doing more teaching and things. So $1.7 million through CCE. And it doesn't stop there. We've added this other line just to take and reflect, and in part there's always questions about how we're going to pay for the debt that we've experienced, the bond that we just got. Well, part of that, the matching money up at College Avenue campus, and that's where there's the good news story of moving back into the College Avenue campus takes and creates an ability to actually reduce expenses there, generate more profit, and hopefully increase the amount of teaching because we've got such good spaces. But part of it is then to CCE, as part of their budget, has been putting money aside to take and do some of the capital work. That will now be redirected and increased by $420,000. So that's factored into that profit margin for a total of $1 million taken pay for the debt for the borrowing. So great news there. And huge news on the side of other efficiencies and savings. So, and this is a really big number. If you sort of think that SaskPower, or the energy that it takes to run this campus, these lights, etc., lights and heating and things like that, should be going up by 10%. So we probably should have to be investing an additional $500,000 every year into our utilities budget just to maintain status quo. But because of the good work by many people, and in some cases it's the people suffering through the fans that are off on the weekends and things, but taking and managing through all that, we're actually taking a dividend, base budget dividend, this isn't one time, but base budget dividend, and reducing the utility budget on this campus by $456,000. A big chunk of that comes from all of these, and those of you that have been living through the lab building construction and other projects and things, this is where we take and get the dividend. The initiatives with SaskPower, the Strategic Investment Fund, etc., have taken and turned some of our older buildings into much more modern, much more efficient, and of course a great contribution to reducing greenhouse gas and sustainability, and that important part of our strategic plan as well. So what could have been easily a negative $456,000 just based on inflation in the utility sector, we're actually generating a savings. So good news there, and we thank in particularly the FM folks for leading that initiative. Same sort of thing in terms of rent and lease costs. Of course, Johnson Chama was in leased accommodation over these past couple of years while we waited for the community project at College Avenue campus to be finished. So we'll have some base budget savings, etc., in the cost of leases across the campus. So lots of different things there. So the bottom line, some summary bullets and things like that. This is our 24th year of balanced budgets. People often ask whether we've got the capability to take and not have a balanced budget. And we do as an institution, but we've also got a principle that we won't unless there's a drastic need. This budget has no specific cuts to individual units, but we all know that the cost of inflation and things in each unit, so if you're maintaining status quo, even though you're not being cut, we know that it's tougher. You can't do all of the same things with the same amount of money that you had last year, particularly the discretionary budgets. And so there are still lots of efficiencies, reorganizations, and things that each of you have to do at the unit level, even though there's not cuts. So you're still, and we see many of those efficiencies happening around many of the different units. We committed at the beginning of this budget cycle, the President announced that if at all possible, she wanted to try and identify at least 5 faculty positions as growth, recognizing the enrollment growth and things. And so that target has been more than achieved. There'll be 9 new academic positions funded in this budget. There are further investments in other student support areas and administrative support across the campus, and likewise for scholarships and things. One of our biggest line items, we always talk about the fact that 75% of our total budget is invested in salaries and things, and so this budget also addresses all of the salary changes, particularly the career growth increments, merit, etc., progression through the ranks and things for that this year, and of course factors in, we know that there's been 0% for economic adjustment this year and things. That in itself has helped balance the budget as well. And so those are fully funded in this budget, and of course the tuition increase is built into that 2.8% here at the university, and we try and minimize that as much as possible. We've reflected on a couple of other universities across the country, particularly here in the West and things like that, just to reflect how our tuition is perhaps a little bit more reasonable than some of the increases in the other areas. So as you can see, 4.8% U of S, 6.6% Manitoba, and for the international folks, a huge increase at UVic. One of our goals overall is right now we're in the bottom third, or close to the bottom third, right on the line. We're 21st out of 59 English-speaking Canadian universities across Canada in terms of the affordability of tuition and fees. And so our goal is to try and stay in that bottom third. And once next year when we do the calculations for some of these bigger increases and things like that, maybe we'll just nudge right back into that area.
Just a couple of other things on that too. The VIC increase is for new visa students, so they're grandfathering current international students, but anybody coming in from this fall forward, it jumps 20% for international students at UVic, reflecting, of course, the fact that they can charge that in Victoria. But the tuition burden is becoming something that we discuss regularly. Half of our graduating undergraduate students in the most recent survey report graduating with no education-related debt, but those who do graduate with debt, the average debt is $14,000, not inconsiderable. We talk about that too in the context of a calculated roughly $1 million premium in lifetime earnings, and we still believe that this is a good investment to make, but we recognize the fact that many students are working 20, 30, 35 hours a week simply to make ends meet.
I know we're going to talk about a little bit more about tuition later on and things like that, but scholarships is a big part of that. As an institution, we invest more in scholarships than most. We're actually second in the country in terms of the percentage of our tuition revenue that goes back into scholarships. It's almost a third. So there's $26 million worth of tuition or worth of scholarship and bursaries allocated out from this university to our students each year. So that's a big number. This is just a reflection here of some of the different trend lines and things like that. Some of the challenges, of course, the one in red at the top, salaries and things like that, that's what we've always talked about in terms of our structural deficit, with that being 75% of our expenses across the board, and it increasing at more than inflation and more than the grants and things like that creates a structural problem and something that we always need to deal with. And of course, a big challenge last year with the drop in the government grant, a little bit easier this year when it's flat. Doesn't make it really easy, but definitely easier than getting the huge reduction that we got last year.
So let's just take a look for a moment at tuition. We've picked arts and business because, of course, the faculty registration determines the tuition rate that you would pay as a student. Arts is one of the lower cost, and business, together with things like engineering, cost more. So a domestic undergraduate student, somebody say coming out of Campbell High School a couple of blocks away, next fall will be paying $653 a course in arts and $763 a course in business. If they're taking a full load of 5 courses, you can see the figure over on the right-hand column. If you are a visa student coming in on a student visa, you are paying $1,960 a course, or very nearly $10,000 a term now, for a full load of courses. I didn't think we'd ever see the day at a Canadian university when anybody would be paying for a 4-year program $80,000 in tuition. We're there now at most Canadian universities, and at UVic and several other BC universities, that's going to be even more. And you see the graduate rates. So again, this reflects the increases that we talked about earlier, the average increase of 2.8%. What we have to try to do as we think through tuition structures is bear a couple of factors in mind. Are we remaining roughly competitive with neighboring institutions? And as Dave said, are we staying where we would like to stay in that bottom third of Canadian English language universities in terms of affordability? What are the burdens we place on students? What are we demanding of them then in terms of hours of work? What proportion of the income we derive from tuition and fees are we returning to students in scholarships and bursaries? All kinds of factors go into determining what a reasonable tuition increase would be. But as we become more and more dependent to balance the operating budget on tuition and fee revenues from students, this question becomes ever more difficult to determine each year. A couple of things about scholarship. Again, as noted earlier, we are second highest among the Canadian comprehensive universities in terms of total student financial assistance as a percentage of our tuition and fee revenues. This year, you'll see a $275,000 increase in financial assistance. We are backfilling about $34,000 in cuts to the SIOS program on the knowledge that most of that money has already been committed, and therefore we believe we owe those students the commitment that we made to them, and we will backfill those cuts. $269K for the Advantage scholarships, and another $20K on top of the $110 introduced last year for refugee funding to match the support offered by the Students' Union, and about another $21K in other scholarship accounts. So we are trying to make available more scholarship resources to students who not only are deserving, but in some cases who, of course, need that financial aid very badly. So moving now to CCB rankings. As you know, we described this earlier. In the budget-making process back in January, all of the individual deans, the associate vice presidents, and directors submit a budget request. And in that set of requests this year were requests for 36 new or newly permanent positions across campus, academic, administrative, all kinds of descriptions there. The Council Committee on Budget sat down and ranked all of those requests and then transmitted those rankings to the University Budget Group, which is essentially the executive team and some of our colleagues in financial services, so that we could think through the recommendations and then decide what we, as a group, would recommend to the President, who in turn takes a budget and recommends it to the board for approval. So here's what CCE did with the 36 requests, and we've split these into academic and academic support, and then later on administrative. First came social work, and in a few slides I think you'll see why that was ranked first. Petroleum systems engineering, computer science, ESL, and this was for the Center for Continuing Education in the English as a Second Language program, and then a position in kinesiology and health studies, where we've seen more than 30% student growth in the last 5 years. And if you've been watching the news recently, you'll see that kinesiology has been in the spotlight for athletics and for the part within their budget stresses that athletics has played. Over on the academic support, staffing, and student support side, CCB recommended, first of all, a psychology clinic director. As you know, our clinical psychology program is one of the leading graduate programs in the university. It attracts students from across the country. It's a jewel in the university's academic reputation. And to support that program and support psychology generally, there have been a succession of requests in recent years for this position. We've finally been able to, CCB has recommended it. They recommended additional international scholarship money for those visa students who are paying so much to us, a student recruiter, an academic advisor in engineering and applied science, and an instructional designer, or as Harvey reminded me this morning, an assistant or associate instructional designer in the Center for Continuing Education. And what that individual does, of course, is facilitate the online and blended courses, supporting faculty and teaching in a distributed or distance medium. Then they said, CCB said, we support the President's initiatives for another student counselor, given the pressing demands for student mental health. A lot of students are experiencing a lot of stress, and we've got to provide services for them. So the President asked for this, and CCB recommended it. And for a coordinator of sexual violence prevention and response for the campus. And finally, CCB said, we would recommend that you support the library's acquisitions budget. As you know from previous fora, costs continue to climb. The cost of licensing electronic resources through the library, subscriptions, journals, databases, and so on goes up every year. And because so much of it is priced in American dollars, if the currency rate is to our disadvantage in Canada, that becomes even more expensive. So CCB said, make sure at least you maintain the acquisitions budget if you can't increase it. I wanted also to say, because there was a request from Dennis Fitzpatrick at the last forum to give you data on sessional teaching. So what you see up there are the data for the winter 2018 term. And what this tells you is how many of the sections taught in that term were sessionally taught by faculty. And just running down them, in arts, 32.5%, business, 36%, education, 50.4%, engineering, 9%, kin, 46%, la cité, 22%, media, art and performance, 16.4%, nursing, just 3%, science, 13%, and social work, 66% sessionally taught. Now, it's a subject of discussion across the country in negotiations with faculty associations, discussions with alumni, and discussions with government. Have we gone too far in sessionalizing teaching? There's some really good reasons for sessionals, really good reasons, and so many of them are really fine teachers. Initially, though, the idea was to bring people in with specialized expertise, especially in professional areas, to teach a course in their area of specialization while also being employed full-time outside the university. For example, in business, you might have somebody who is a partner down at one of the accounting firms, but who really enjoys teaching and likes to come in and teach a course a week or an evening course or a weekend course or a spring-summer course in accounting. That's a good use of a professional accountant teaching a professional discipline. Similarly, in social work, registered social workers who are out employed in the field full-time will come in and teach a class. In education, we have a lot of retired teachers or teachers in practice teaching education classes because they enjoy doing so. They don't want to make a career of it, but they enjoy teaching the odd class. However, once you start getting up around 66%, you've got an issue. That issue arises because of inadequate resources in a faculty. That's one thing. It arises when you've got an unusual number of sabbaticals at one time. It can arise if you've got an unusual number of illnesses or of course buyouts for research. But again, 66% is very high, and we want to begin to address that. So that is where we were in winter 2018. It moves around quite dramatically from term to term, but we wanted to give you that snapshot since the question came up at the last forum. And by the way, if you can read the small print down there, that does not include off-campus courses, but does include all sessional teaching at the Saskatoon campus for social work and nursing, online teaching by sessionals based in Regina or elsewhere, and CCE teaching, which contributes, again, as Dave said earlier, so much to the university's success. You've seen that graph before, and we put it back up here again just to show you. If you look at the bottom right, the kind of bluey turquoise line, that's engineering. Among the faculties, the major faculties, it is the lowest resourced per student, and we got to do something to address that. Engineering students are in very large classes. Engineering faculty are struggling with high enrollments. We've got to do something to help them address that demand. The demand line that meets it there, the red line, is JSGS. But of course, the cost in JSGS is naturally lower per student. You don't have all of the labs. You basically have an individual without a lot of fancy equipment or labs standing in front of a class and lecturing relatively homogeneous public policy classes. Engineering is a much more expensive discipline to teach. And when you see a graph like that, you say, that's something we need to have a look at. So here are the decisions. We are giving 2 new faculty positions, tenure-track faculty positions, to the Faculty of Social Work. So that budget money goes into their budget in the current fiscal year. They'll start a recruitment process, and we hope to have those colleagues in place by next July 1, or if possible, earlier than that, to assist in bringing down that amount of sessional teaching. We're providing a new faculty position to the Faculty of Engineering and Applied Science, and again, an attempt to bring that line up a little bit, and that follows a series of new positions in the last 3 or 4 years. We're putting 2 new tenure track, these are tenure track positions, into the Department of Computer Science. One, a position which the department will determine the specialization. One position which is specifically for a new program, the Masters in Health Information Management. That's an online mid-career professional degree that was approved by Executive Council and Senate about a year and a half to 2 years ago. And we're going to get that new mid-career professional degree up and running next year with this new faculty position. ESL position as recommended, we're doing that. We're doing the sport management position. But to note too, we are providing the salaries and benefits for Canada Research Chairs whose terms have ended. CRCs are largely, in most cases, externally funded, mainly externally funded with federal government funds. When their terms as CRCs come to an end, the federal money is gone, it dries up. But we have an obligation to them because they, by then, are tenured colleagues at the university. So we are transferring funds into MAP and into science to fund the salaries and benefits of 2 CRCs whose CRC terms have come to an end. And then you can see over on the other side, the psychology clinic director has been funded, a student recruiter, an academic advisor in engineering, and 2 assistant or associate instructional designers in CCE. One other thing that we should mention, since CCB recommended it, we did not put more funding into UR International for scholarships, but we will monitor enrollments in the enrollment funnel on the visa side. If we need additional scholarship support during the year, we will find a way to provide that. An additional counselor, as recommended by CCB and requested by the President, the Coordinator of Sexual Violence Prevention and Response. We've made a 2% increase to library acquisitions, and we know that that actually doesn't even keep up with inflation, but it's certainly better than a 0 and much better than a cut. We've also said to the library they don't have to get the cost recoveries of $49,000 that they've targeted for years with things like overdue fines, which frees up another $50K for the university. And on research, we're continuing what we committed to do, the $30,000 a year annual support for the Fedoric Chair. We have put $100,000 a year for 2 years into Canary Digital Research, which may then allow us to leverage, I think it's 2 or possibly 3 additional positions under that, and another $300K for CFI equipment. The research grant, research support grant, is up about $20,000 to $2.34 million. Dave.
Good. As Tom had mentioned, CCB went through and did incredible work, a lot of time listening to all of the different presentations, admin or academic, to then sit down and rate and rank and make suggestions on the administrative side in addition to the academic side. And this is the list that they came up with. And so just not to confuse you with what was actually funded, I'll speak to the ones that were funded on the next slide, but if you wanted to go back and compare them one to the other, we definitely followed the advice of CCB in terms of the allocations. So the first one, to continue with our area of greatest risk and things, is the information services on the security side, so an additional security analyst there. Second one, in HR, and you've all been touched with this and been getting your pay every 2 weeks. Huge change to be able to take and do that, basically doubling the workload, and in recognition of that, more people to take and do twice as much work. A new position for data analyst in the Office of Resource Planning, and in FM, which actually should be FM and HR, who jointly will be developing a safety officer position, mainly to focus on asbestos, and this is a joint effort by the two of them. There's been a long-standing need for permanent positions in the development office, and I think you've heard us talk before about how we can lever small amounts of money into big donations and larger amounts of money that help across the campus by investing in our development office, and so converting 2-term positions that are in there into permanent. And a change that's coming, we've talked about this in the future. The Wascana Centre Authority has morphed into the Provincial Capital Commission, and they're looking at changing how they do work, particularly in the area of roads and grounds, and recognizing that government has its own roads and grounds capability, of course, for the many facilities that they have outside Wascana Centre, and the same for City, who have parks galore that they're already responsible to. And so a thought that, well, maybe they should just be extending those services into the parts of Wascana Centre that they're responsible for, which leaves us with no roads and grounds capability. That's one scenario. So we're studying that at the moment, and to study it and to do what's right anyway, establishing a roads and grounds manager, no matter what the scenario is, whether it's a Provincial Capital Commission contract that we pay for. We pay about $800,000 a year just to take care of our grass and landscaping and things, and we need a manager in charge of it. So those are the ones that were funded, not quite all of the CCB list, but a good chunk of it. Now I just wanted to tell you, part of our goal in all of these forums and all of the different correspondence is to take and make it as transparent as we can and try and explain the changes and the fiscal situation at the campus. So this is just a screenshot of the many different things that exist on the Office of Resource Planning page, and there's some more on the Financial Services page. But you'll note that this particular one has got the budget grant letters from the province, if you want to see exactly what the province says when they give us direction and send us money. And conversely, what we're saying to the budget units, the deans and the AVPs and others, in terms of the detailed breakdown of what we're presenting here today, but the more detail of exactly what it is. And there's another document, like if you click on the comprehensive budget plan, that document is the one that has gone to the board to suggest and seek approval then for the decision item about what tuition should be, what the overall budget allocation should be. And if you went on to that one, you'll notice, and if you're interested in information, and we've talked about an awful lot of different things about scholarship and about student debt, about comparable things. There's, I think, a 13-page document that just speaks about tuition, and it will show where we rank in undergraduate, where we rank in master's, and where we rank in PhD across the country. So lots of data and things on there. So the next page, just wanted to show you this is one of the pages in one section out of the budget letter itself. And so not to pick on arts, but they happen to be alphabetically first. Just to give you a sense of some of the information that's on there. Is the arrow showing up there?
Yeah.
But then it disappears, or no?
No, it's there.
It stays there.
Can you see that at the back? You can? Okay.
And I'm intentionally doing it here rather than a laser printer, because for recording and things like that, it just wouldn't show up, and our colleagues in Saskatoon or people who look at it later wouldn't be able to see it. But it has things like the total allocation to arts. So the total budget in arts is $16 million. So if you wanted to see what it is for each of the different units around the campus, that data is there. It will show in the next column what the budget changes are in terms of what allocations, or if you went to last year's budget letter, you'll see in this column there would be a whole bunch of red, like how much, what one unit would be cut 4%, another one 3%, another one 1%. You don't see that red in in this one this time, but the individual investments. So in this case, an investment for a new psychology clinic director at $85,000. And then this column here, the second last one, is just to reflect this structural issue in terms of how much, even though there's no salary increase, even though there's no economic salary increase, that there are still increased salary expenses for each unit. So for instance, in arts, we need to find $228,060 to take and just cover the cost of merits, career growth increments, and such within the unit. So every unit takes an experience, and that's where we've covered that from the center as well. So in fact, it translates then, in the case of arts, to a net budget envelope increase of $313,000. And you'll see that throughout the units. One thing that might come with questions or something that's a little bit different is you'll notice, I think in like in business admin, engineering, and in grad studies, including Johnson Chama, there is a line item that talks about an enrollment adjustment to the differential tuition share. There's a couple of special programs that we've agreed to offer on the basis that there's some shared risk between the unit and the center in terms of the number of students and the revenues and things like that. And so this reflects, in most cases they're fairly small, it reflects the actual change, and so the credit, these all happen to be increases, and so therefore the credit and things like that goes back to the individual unit. And so this is just a sample of one of the many pages.
Maybe we could just add there too, since again kinesiology has been in the news this week. If you look line 2 in the kinesiology, total kinesiology budget all in, including all operations, academic, rec and athletic, is about $10.3 million. The rec and athletic fee, like all other fees, is going up 2.8%, which will bring in about another $96.7 thousand. Nearly all students on campus pay that rec and athletic fee, but even with that increase, just for the athletics portion, we are still about $500,000 in deficit. Hence some of the news about team cuts that you've seen recently, and some of the pain that has caused to students in the teams that have been cut.
The next one isn't necessarily a budget item and things per se, but something near and dear to our heart, and something that's going to happen in 2 weeks, and hopefully lots of people here will be participating in. I know lots of people here will be working it in one way or another, and many of you hopefully are volunteers. So here's some stats. Things like 451 volunteers. So that's fantastic, having that number, and will help. We're trying to make it a memorable experience. You may have noticed already the pianos that have been moved into place, and it's great seeing the number of mainly students, but hopefully staff too, just playing. It's absolutely incredible and invigorating. Registration is up to 45, 54. We hope that it gets to 5,000 or so. It's still the biggest conference in the city of Regina ever. And so something that's very important, generates lots of economic benefits and things like that, but a real case to show, or way for us to showcase what the university does to the community.
And just a little promo, something which I have no financial interest whatsoever. A colleague named Brian Stockton, who teaches in the film department, did a film 2 years ago called The Sabbatical. It's a comedy, very good comedy, about a faculty member who goes on sabbatical, and he has to produce a book. And all kinds of misadventures befall him. So Brian's film, The Sabbatical, is going to be screened 3 times during Congress. We are hopeful that it will give him national exposure. If you haven't seen the film, you gotta go to it. You will laugh yourself silly at a couple of scenes. End of promo.
And one figure I didn't mention, but it is actually something significant because it's unique to the University of Regina, is the 602 Student Travel Awards. Like, we're actually trying to sort of take and enable students across the country. So we're giving $500 each to actually take and assist, help them get to Congress. So that's a unique Regina approach.
And the money stays in the system.
That's right. And the way that we're working is they'll be staying in residence and sort of eating our food and things like that. And so a little bit of a way to take and leave her, get real benefit, because it's a real $500 to the students, but it also makes sure that we're full in residence, et cetera, which we are. So. And that's it. Hopefully we've left enough time for questions and things like that, and be glad to take them. Please come up to the mic. As we mentioned, we might be able to hear you, but it just won't be recorded, and colleagues in the future or in Saskatoon won't hear it if you don't go to the mic.
Hi, I'm Richard McLennan from Psychology, and I guess in previous discussions there was some mention about developing a Statistics Canada Research Data Center on campus with funding from the federal government and the provincial government. What is the current status of that?
I believe that that's well underway. Again, Dave couldn't be here today because he's tied up in another research meeting, but I believe that initiative is well underway.
Hey, yeah, I believe we've got the space allocated, and the partners have, it's of course partnered with many more people than just the university and things like that, and I believe that they've all anteed up, and it's a matter of putting it into place. I think the location is in 2 Research Drive, where it will end up being housed.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Richard asked my question, so
There you
good
go.
answer. Thanks.
Oh. So do we get credit for 2 questions then?
Thank you for presentation and PT from engineering, and also represent the Alpha executive team. This is more like in the future, because as you know, last year we got dip a few percentage, and
$7 million cut
I know.
last year. Yeah.
And the K-12 have been lobby very hard and got it back. Do we have any plan to try to recoup those cuts back over the next few years?
We do our best every year to advocate to government. Right now, they remain, from everything that we can see, committed to balancing the provincial budget. There's a lot of pressure on K-12 simply on the numbers side, the enrollment side, with these new schools, not only full already, but with portables being put on the new schools. We'll see more of those kids coming out to campus starting in about 2022, at which point we'll be in an even better position to continue advocating for post-secondary.
One more question, and also probably in the future. Lately, they have a new coming out about your best, your bar program duplication. How serious of the government did all new happened in the 90s and before? Are we have any plan to deal with those, or it's just the new of the day?
Okay. There was a remark made by a previous minister, probably 8 or 10 months ago, that government should be looking at education, engineering, and nursing. I can tell you there's no looking at education, there's no looking at engineering. Both of those faculties are full. Both of those faculties are graduating students in good numbers who are finding jobs, so there's not a labor market oversupply. And both of them or the 2 of them together have complementary programming. Where they are looking now, and it's underway, is a review of the nursing, the 2-provider, 2-program model of nursing. The question is being asked, why is the collaborative, the Regina Sask Poly Collaborative, delivering in Saskatoon as well as Regina? And why is the U of Sask nursing program being delivered in Regina as well as Saskatoon? So the 3 deans, Sask Poly, our dean, David Gregory, and the Saskatoon dean have all submitted very detailed reports. Their conclusion, their unanimous conclusion as 3 deans, is that the 2-provider, 2-city model actually makes sense, in large part because our program is direct entry, Saskatoon's is not. Moving one program to another city would mean you would have to move all of the students, and you would need additional facilities up there. So the government is now considering this. We expect a response from them possibly by early next month. I would be very surprised if any dramatic change were to take place, because the argument seems to be it's working actually fairly well. And the other thing I could add, if there's anybody, is there anybody from nursing here today? We just got news today, Karen, that the pass rate on NCLEX, that's the nursing exam that everybody in Canada outside of Quebec and most American nursing students has to take, the University of Regina has the best pass rate in the province. It is well in excess of the national pass rate, and better than the American pass rate. So congratulations to colleagues in nursing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In fact, Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the provincial pass rate, averaging with some other program that we won't name, is 84%, and the Regina pass rate is 87, correct? Which is nice. Which then you can infer what the pass rate at the other unnamed program might be. We're very proud of that. It's a relatively new program. It's our newest faculty. Putting that collaborative together was a huge amount of work. The teaching and the mentorship in the faculty is obviously paying off richly, and the students we're attracting and graduating are doing really well. What more can we want there? Any other questions? I must say, I think it's much nicer this year to come with some green and blue rather than all of last year's red. And we, again, want to thank you for everything that you do individually and collectively to make sure this university remains sustainable and graduates wonderful students and does wonderful research and community service. So if there are no further questions, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.